What was it like working for an airline? Because that's a very non-traditional hotel owner.
Well, what's interesting is that I always felt the airline business was very close to the hotel business. They were very interdependent businesses. There are a lot of marketing synergies. When you do resorts in particular, you're very dependent on airlines and lift, what they call lift. But I never knew the airline economics. I never knew anything about how they charge, how they price, how they market, why they spend so much money on advertising, what their salespeople do. I've seen them around, and I'd done some stuff with them in Bermuda and the Bahamas and some of that, but I'd never really been intimately involved. And I'd never been with a billion dollar business. I mean, this was at that time, a billion. Today, I don't know, it must be 30 billion, but then it was a $1 billion business. And it was a big corporate bureaucracy. But I found that hotels are very dependent on airlines. And it was a very broadening experience for me watching that. And eventually, we had a company that was doing very poorly. We turned the company around. Then the airline was about to was moving to Dallas from New York. And they sold the hotel company. And when they sold the hotel company, Bob Crandall and I met. He said, I want to meet you for breakfast. I want to give you an offer. It's very interesting, too, actually, now that I remember. And I said, okay, what time you want to meet? He said, I'll meet you at 6 a.m. at the Howard Johnson's restaurant, the corner of 3rd Avenue and 42nd Street. 6 a.m. I said, I'm living in Stamford, Connecticut. I couldn't even get there. There's no train that gets you there. So I had to go the night before. He used to take the 4:30 train every morning from New Jersey, where he lived, and he started all his meetings at 6 a.m. So now I'm going to sign. So I said, okay. So anyway, I stay overnight in the hotel, and I meet him at 6 a.m. at the Howard Johnson's restaurant. And he says, I want you to become the Senior Vice President of Sales and Advertising of American, and I want you to move to Dallas. I said, why? I said, well, why me? I said, I don't know the airline business. I'm a hotel guy. You know, I said, so he gave me a few reasons. Nothing very substantial, like I don't love you, you know, this, that, or that, or whatever. But he liked me because he felt I was very customer sensitive and bright, according to him, and whatever. And I said, I'll think about it. And I thought about it for about a half a day, and I said, I don't want to do it. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, I just don't think there's enough, the rationale, what he gave me for wanting me in the job wasn't good enough. He didn't know enough about my character. He didn't know enough about what was important to me. He didn't know really what my real talents were. And I felt that it just was something that said it wasn't right. So I never went. And they sold the company, and I ended up a year later moving the company to Chicago, where the new owners were for Americana Hotels for the last 5 years of my Americana term, and ended up going from Senior Vice President of Marketing to Executive VP of Operations, because the operations guy left, and I took over and finally got in 1981, I'm now in the business 20 years, I finally got to be in charge of operations of a hotel company. Took me 20 years to get there. And I worked for a fellow in Chicago by the name of Hal Milner, who was an ex-financial senior VP finance for Marriott. He was a very, very difficult guy, a very demanding guy. And I had to put together the operating team, the regional vice presidents. I had a marketing person reporting to me. I had engineering and purchasing and all that kind of stuff. And in Americana, it was really essentially I was running a hotel company.
You have a very unique perspective. And I don't know how many of these young people know this, but a lot of the hotel chains got their start with the airlines. Airlines were parent companies of numerous hotel chains. Western was part of United. You know, as you said, Americana was part of American Airlines. You know, there are SAS Hotels, which is a Scandinavian offshoot of Scandinavian airline. Le Méridien, which is around, was part of Air France for a very long time. So, you know, quite obviously, there is a relationship there. But from a business standpoint, the airlines could never make the hotels work. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think the airline mentality is not a hotel's mentality. The airline mentality, and first of all, the pricing conditions are very different. The airline business has cost structures that the business model, when you have fuel costs and you have capital costs and you have labor intensity and you have very significant price sensitivity, I think that the whole dynamics of the business are different. The rationale, the reason airlines went into the hotel business, and it started actually earlier than the ones you mentioned, because TWA was involved with Hilton International, and Pan American, an airline that no one in this room probably even remembers, was involved with Intercontinental Hotels. Right. What happened, the way that happened was internationally, first of all, it was not domestic. Internationally, these countries wanted hotels, and the airlines weren't flying there. So they would make deals with the airlines to fly there, giving them route structures, and they'd make deals to give them management contracts for the hotels. And the airlines went out and hired traditional hotel people to run them in both those companies. And it looked like it was a symbiotic relationship when in fact it really wasn't. It really was just another, in order to get the airline route, the airlines got in the hotel business. So they never really expected to make the hotels work. When I got to Americana, it was such a mess, you could not believe it. I mean, the airlines had totally messed it up, because they brought in a couple of airline people and they just couldn't cope with the hotel mentality, the hotel daily, the daily nature, the retail nature of hospitality, the nature of services. It was just very different. It looks similar on the surface, but it's very different.
Were there any fundamental differences between managing a sales force and managing the operations, the day-to-day operations of a hotel? Did you have to use it? Were there a different set of skills you needed?
Well, clearly, when you're operating a hotel, there is a financial component to the management of the hotel. There are numbers, there are statistics, there are all kinds of things that get into it. It's a far more technical scenario. Managing a sales force is, for the most part, a major motivational activity. Salespeople, and I do that even still today, salespeople are being judged almost on an 8-hour basis every day. It's kind of like somebody hitting in the major league in baseball. You don't get a hit every time up. Salespeople have to deal with failure on a daily basis. Traditional workforce doesn't fail 3 times a day. So in sales leadership, you're dealing with that demotivation kind of scenario, and so you're really forced to be in a very positive model most of the time. So, and I think although it requires positive management with others, there's not as many peaks and valleys as you'll find in managing a sales force. It was the most difficult job I ever had. It's a 5-star deluxe hotel. I was the first director of marketing. Most of the staff hated me because they didn't like people walking around with badges. They didn't like conventions and meetings. They only wanted banquets and elegant visitors. And the hotel wasn't running that good occupancy, and I had to get business. So I had to manage the relationships between the staff. I had to learn the plaza operations. I used to go to the kitchen and eat with the chef. I used to do all these kinds of things. I played on the softball team with the bellman. I was on the bowling team in Times Square with the hourly workers, trying to get myself into the plaza and figure it out. And I was just a little guy from Boston. I mean, I'd go into the restaurant, they had all this fancy food. I knew nothing about it, and trying to learn it.
Do good salespeople have to have some kind of operational background, and conversely, are great operational people have some sense of what it's been like to be a salesperson?
Well, I think, the old Indian saying of you don't know what a person feels like until you walk in his moccasins is probably true to some extent. I think that it's obviously more valuable if somebody who's in operations goes out on sales calls and gets a lot of doors slammed in his face, to feel what that's like, to see when a customer is beating him up, to feel what that's like, and vice versa. I think it's important for somebody in sales to go in and find out how they messed up operations because they had a check-in coming at the wrong time or something like that. I think it's important, but it's not absolutely vital. I think still you don't have to be in every department nor do everything to have some level of sensitivity. What is vital is to develop a level of sensitivity for your peers, is to think about what kind of problems, is to talk to them, is to have lunch with them at an officer's table in a hotel, say what's going on, what works, what doesn't work, is to be intellectually curious, not because you're wanting only to build your own knowledge, but because you're wanting to relate. They're part of a team that you work with. So you don't have to do it, but you have to be very curious about it. I think that's the important thing.
In academic circles, sometimes we make a distinction between leadership and management, and you've been a leader and you've been a manager. Is there a distinction in your mind, and if so, what is it?
I don't believe there is a distinction.
Okay.
I mean, I'm an oddball when it comes to that. I think people will, there's tons of books on leadership and tons of books on management, and you can go by definitions of managers or executors, and leaders are strategic drivers, and there's all kinds of things like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think I act any different as a manager than I do as a leader. Now, just going for myself, I think that when you're involved, the difference may be only in the scope of what you're able to do. When you're in a leadership role, perhaps your scope is wider, but when you're in a management role, your scope may be less, but you're still leading people. Mm-hmm. So I really think that I would merge the two terms. Management is a term actually that I'm not terribly comfortable with. Management is a term that says to me control. Management means intrusiveness. Management means sort of doing things with people and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to do and checking and all that kind of stuff. Leadership is a broader issue that says that you are not only setting a direction for people to go in, but you're allowing them, giving them the tools to be successful, and you're watching them exercise their capabilities in the greatest way, and you give them the playing field to be successful. So I prefer to deal with leaders than managers.
Well, you give them the playing field, but do you inspire them too? Is that part of leadership?
Well, I think yeah, but I don't see why that's any different. If you were the general manager of a hotel and you say I'm the manager, you're inspiring people too. Perhaps it's a little more difficult if you're so specific and so tight on some things to be inspiring, but I do think that if people are working with you or for you, it's very important that you feel that you have a sense of responsibility to them, that they feel that you are there for them to help them be successful. I have always defined the corporation as never an end in itself, only a means to an end. It should be that way. You should never join a company or be in a company where you think that's it. That company is there for the purpose of improving you as a person and giving you opportunity. So it's a means to an end that you want. People say to me, if there's no opportunity in my company to move up, what do I do? I said, if there's no opportunity in this company to move up, my job is to get you ready for a job that's outside the company, that'll provide you, and we've done that. The franchise business and the hotel business is filled with people that have worked in my organizations that the opportunities weren't in the organization. They went out and they're doing it for somebody else, or they're doing a bigger job for somebody else. That's a real great, that can give you a lot of pride that you've given people that opportunity. So,
you hadn't gone to hotel school or had any educational background in it, so did you have to kind of learn it on the job? Is that the way it worked?
Well, I learned it on the job. Basically, most of my knowledge was gained from my customers. The people who were doing the work in the hotels were so busy all the time that I just I couldn't get any knowledge. So the only time I knew what was really happening was when I talked to my customers and they were telling me what was right and what was wrong. But I didn't know anything about food costs. I didn't know anything about menu planning. I didn't know anything about, in fact, when I first went into the hotel, I didn't know what a convention manager was. So I really had to learn all the nomenclature while I was selling and trying to deliver services.
And what's the role of humor in leading other people?
Well, I don't think, let me take the latter question first.
Okay.
Because I think that you never want to take yourself too seriously. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing that people sitting in this audience or people talking to me should understand is that I am no different than they are, that I am as human as they are. You know, it's like when the President of the United States, whether you agree with him or don't agree with him, says, you know, I really got a good greeting in Canada yesterday. You know, people were waving at me with all their fingers. You know, what you think about is that he's human. And he's subject to error the same as anybody else, and so am I. And so I think humor has always been, in my case, a reason to prove to people that I am no different. The fact that I'm a boss or whatever doesn't make me any different. And so I think people can relate to humor, and so it's an important part of my style, and it should be an important part of everybody's style. If you're too serious, and I tend to be, my wife accuses me too often of giving speeches that are too intellectual. You know, but I try to tell a few jokes, but I always have a message I want to give. You know, but I think you have to have a semblance of both.
What have you learned from being in the home of the world champion Boston Red Sox and the world champion New England Patriots?
Well, I was a season ticket holder of the New England Patriots for many years. In their good, in their bad times, I should say. I wouldn't say the good times are bad, but there weren't very many good times. And my grandfather took me to my first Red Sox game in 1946. And the Patriots, what I learned by watching Bob Kraft is that leadership, ownership can make such a significant difference. That in 10 years that he's owned the team, what he's been able to do, and the way he's been able to build a team, where people feel good about each other, that you can win without having the highest level of statistics, you can win without being the prettiest, you can win ugly, but you win. And there's a feeling and a camaraderie that exists that rarely gets there, and that Bob Kraft and the staff he's put together through his coach, I find just an amazing example. And as I was saying the other night, I said, to me, the firing of Bill Parcells was an immense management decision, just an unbelievable decision against all odds, against everybody's criticism, when he fired the one coach and hired the other one. But he stuck by his principles. He believed in himself. He believed he was doing the right thing, and it turned out to be the right thing. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned with that. The Red Sox, I guess the thing about the Red Sox that I would say is that never give up hope. I mean, you know, it's the amazing thing about the Red Sox. I'll tell you, it's two stories about this. That when the Red Sox were winning 10-3 in the last of the ninth inning against the Yankees in the seventh game, there were 4 friends of mine who were rabid Red Sox fans, and myself, that all felt, even when they were 2 outs, they were still going to lose. I mean, it was so ingrained in us, and there was no chance they were going to lose at 10-3 with 2 outs. It just wasn't going to happen. Yet intellectually, we could not get there. To say that, you know, the lesson there is that, you know, sometimes you get so stuck on something that you don't think anything's possible, and it's not even reality anymore. And I think that changed that. And then at the end, you know, a friend of mine in Atlanta who's a University of Georgia Bulldogs fan, and there's nothing like, believe me, a University of Georgia Bulldogs fan in Georgia, anywhere, even a Red Sox fan. At 12 o'clock that night after the Red Sox beat the Yankees, calls me on the telephone and says, "Congratulations." And I said, "I can't believe that you're calling me at 12 o'clock. He says, "I know how important it is to you." And it was just a friend of mine saying that, you know, and I think that was very interesting, because it showed me that what a friend really thinks about, when he really can think about you. And then after the World Series win, I got a phone call from a friend of my wife's in Stamford, Connecticut, who called me. I couldn't talk to her. I was so emotional, and I said thank you, and I said, but I just can't talk. The very next day, I called my 93-year-old uncle, who lives in Salem, who's one of my model. The person is the last surviving uncle I have. He's the son of my grandfather who took me to the game in '46. And I called him on the phone. I said, "Uncle Lou, I'm calling to congratulate you." And he broke down. I broke down. It was just you know, one of these real emotional things, and you can't. It's just because you think about all the people who weren't alive, who waited, and you say to yourself, "Gee, this is only a baseball game." But I think there's something greater than that. I think what's greater than it is that when so many people get together and feel so good that even my wife, who's a Yankee fan, believe it or not, mean, even she was happy about it. I mean, so it's just something that I think occurs once in a lifetime. I don't think you'll ever have that kind of feeling again. So, well, I think clearly that leading by example is in every leadership textbook there is. That, in other words, if you don't show up to the office till 10 o'clock in the morning, you're going to find over time people aren't going to show up till 10 o'clock in the morning. If you go out and spend money on big expense accounts and people see you going to lavish dinners and taking all these kind of things, they're going to follow you. I mean, this is just two examples. So I think leadership by example is very important. But I think in my way of leadership, I don't want carbon copies of Mike Leven out there with the 5 people who report to me. What I want in the people who report to me is to be themselves. I want to bring out themselves. I insist on them being their people, not Mike Leven. But I do insist on the culture. So in Mike Levin's culture, the customer is right. It may not always be right, but he's always the customer. That's my culture. I want them to be that way. So I will teach them that, and if they don't do that, I will criticize it. But I don't want my 5 direct reports to be acting in every situation like me. Some have more attention to detail than I have. Some have less. Some are more creative than I am. Some have less. Some are better managers. They're more intrusive than I am. Some have less. And I want them to be themselves. I work for a guy named Pat Ford. And Pat Ford was, I think, the best operational mentor I ever had. But I wasn't in operations, I was in marketing. He was learning from me because he was not a good marketing planner. He was a real operator, and I was learning from him at the same time. And then about a year into the job, I said to him, you know, I really want to get back in operations. You can see this thing happening all over again.
Sure.
And so he said, look, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to make you a regional operations director. And he gave me the Parker House, Hyannis, and the 4 Royal Coach hotels to supervise, which were the biggest hotels in the company. And he proceeded to teach me real operations, payroll management and other expense management and really planning and budgeting. And we spent a lot of time together traveling around the country and doing these kinds of things. And then about a year later, in 1975, in late 75, I got another opportunity, and I had to cross a very significant moral threshold.
Really? What was that?
I got a job offer to move back to New York and become Senior Vice President of Marketing for Americana Hotels. Now, not only was my company pulling me back into sales, now the industry was pulling me back into sales and marketing, and I got this opportunity. It was about twice the money. And it was Americana was a big, well-known company that had hotels in New York, Washington, Bal Harbour, Florida, Puerto Rico, Korea, Samoa, Hawaii, Mexico. I mean, it was a very interesting job, and it was owned by American Airlines. So there was an airline component to it that I thought had real interesting capability for learning. In other words, I hadn't really been in the airline business, and I thought it would be really a good learning experience. So I resigned and decided to move. We were going to live in Connecticut and commute into New York City. And I got a call. I was working for Pat Ford. I got a call from Jack Dunphy, and he said, come in and see me. And Pat Ford was Senior Vice President of Operations, and I was Senior Vice President I was a Regional Vice President of Operations. And I went to see Jack, and he said, I want to make you a counteroffer. And he said, I want you to become Executive Vice President of the company. And Pat Ford will report to you, and I'll raise your salary. Wasn't as high as the other one, but wasn't Connecticut. And you have to move to New Hampshire, to Exeter, New Hampshire, which wasn't so bad either. There was no tax there, and no state tax. And still is no state tax there. And I'll upgrade your car. We had a company car there. I had a Chevrolet, so they'll upgrade you to an Oldsmobile. And I'll give you this great job. And you'll be the boss. And one step away from the presidency of the company. So I went home, I talked to my wife, who was more prone to want to go to Connecticut than to go to New Hampshire for some reason, but that wasn't. And I thought about it for a while, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't leap over the guy who had given me the opportunity. Wow. I'm not sure Pat even knows today about that, but the end of the story is kind of interesting, but I just said, you know something, I can't do it. So I went back to Jack Dunphy and I said, look, I can't. Pat Ford had been there for 22 years. And for me to walk in and be his boss after the opportunity he gave me to go into operations, and what he taught me is I couldn't confront it. It just didn't sit right with me. So I turned it down and I went to New York. About 6 months later, the guy who was the marketing person for Dunphy, who would replace me when I went into operations that Pat Ford brought in, they gave him the job on top of Pat Ford. John Canals, who you know,
Right.
who eventually became president of the company,
Right.
and Pat Ford left
Right.
the company.
Right.
And had I done that, I probably would have been president a lot earlier, about 10 years earlier than I got to be a president. But I just I could never face Pat Ford again if I did that.
The moral dilemma you faced with Pat Ford, and that decision you had to make. And that's really inspiring to me to hear a story like that, given today's business climate and the corporate scandals. So 2 questions. First, with today's economic, social pressures, would you have made that same decision in today's climate? And 2, what advice do you give to young people going into this business, facing ethical, moral dilemmas, and how to avoid or handle those situations?
Well, first of all, I don't want to sound like a minister or a preacher in a sense that I preach high ethics and high morals. I think people have to do what's in their heart, what's in their mind, to do what's right for them. In my case, those decisions, which might appear to be hard, were not that hard, because it was clear to me that it wasn't right to do. In the couple of jobs that I left because of things like at Days Inn, et cetera, it was clear to me that I had to do it at economic disadvantages. I just tell you one story which says why you can't judge people. Is at Days Inn, I had a lawyer working for me I was very friendly with. He happens to be at Sendant now. We did a lot of work together. We traveled around the world together. We did a lot of work together. And after I left Days Inn, he stayed there and he knew all about it. And one day we had lunch, and I said to him, Joel, what I don't understand is how can you stay at Days Inn knowing that these guys are crooks? And he said to me, Mike, he said, I have a mortgage to pay, and I have sick kids. And he did. He had a couple of sick kids. And I couldn't really stand in judgment of him, because his situation said he was not a participant in the fraud. He just happened to be there. So I had to say to him, I understand. And so for everybody has different situations. Everybody walks to his own drummer. And I think you have to make a decision what works for you. In some cases, economics is a driving force, because you may have a disabled child who needs care, and you just can't do it. You can't throw everything out, so you have to hang around. You may have to make a decision that you would not normally make. Then there were others who make decisions regardless of that. You know, they're heroic, and heroic examples for all of us, but it doesn't mean that you can do it. So I think you just set a guideline for yourself and say, I'm not willing to sacrifice what will be my future, but I may sometimes have to sacrifice a decision on the basis of a temporary condition I'm in.
Around this time, you also got involved with a group of folks who were struggling a little bit and were trying to form the Asian American Hotel Association. What caused you to get involved with this lot?
Well, they were not trying to form it. Actually, what happened, Tarun, was that we had, of the 100 franchises we had about 30 franchise is owned by Indians from India, called Asian. We call them Asians now, but they're Indians. And I knew nothing about these people. They had gotten into the hotel business in an area that I had never been in. I'd never been in 32-room or 40-room or 50-room hotels, or nothing that I would talk about. And that was a joke, actually. Everybody up? Is anybody up? So I get tired of hearing these stories. But and I started to do some research. I started to look at it, and what I found was that there were a lot of Indian-owned hotels, and I developed a relationship with a couple of the people in the community, and they started to tell me how they couldn't get loans, they couldn't get insurance, they were getting discriminated against, et cetera, and so forth. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, they say our hotels are dirty, we don't pay our bills, blah, blah, blah. And so I went out and I started to do some research, and I found out that we had the same amount of bad payers in that community as any others. We had the same amount of problems in that community as any others. It was nothing different. It was pure discrimination. And they were complaining about banners, American-owned, and things like that, and whatever. So I sat with a couple of these people, and I said, look, you need an association. You need an association that can bring you together, your group together, that can lobby and get stuff in and whatever. And they said, okay, let's form it. We formed it with 12 people. As a board of directors, I put a board together, which was about 6 people from the community and 6 people from the so-called white community. And I brought in a couple of magazines from the Hotel Motel Manager magazine, Hotel Business magazine, from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. I had a couple of people there, Ken Hine and another person. I had a consultant, a number of others. And we needed $100,000 to get it going, and we got the money. Henry agreed to pay the $100,000 from our company. I sold him on the idea, which he believed in, which was, as I say with Henry, Henry would, you know, if you could give a good rationale, he'd support it. So we got $100,000 up, and we formed the association, and we had our first conference in Atlanta in 1989. There were about 150 people showed up. We had 12 members. We began selling memberships, and today the organization is 8,000 members, owns about $40 billion worth of real estate, and represents about 20,000 hotels and motels. And AHOA is probably the most powerful single lodging association or organization today. And of course, we got a lot of support from the Indian community. After that, it became a very significant portion of our franchises that we sold, but it also was a significant, I mean, it's probably 50% of the Hampton Inn owners today. And then people would call me, like the fellow who was running Hampton Inn, and say, gee, you know, I don't do any business with, quote, these people. Heard that before, I'm sure. And tell me about them. Like, what are they, from Mars? You know, you know, it's ridiculous. I said, let me tell you, the quality scores are the same, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same. They're like anybody else, there's no difference. I said, you got bad apples in the barrel the same as anybody else has bad apples in the barrel. And so they started to do business there. I get calls from other hotel companies, and then when I got to Holiday Inn, a lot of the individuals followed me when we opened the Holiday Express concept, and they became a driving force for the growth in the Holiday Express brand, which went from 2 to 1,000. And it really changed, I think, changed a lot of the landscape of the industry. Not that it might not have happened, it just probably would have taken a lot longer. But the credit doesn't only go to me, it goes to the people who helped organize it, who executed it. I was the strategic vision of it, but the executors were H.P. Rama and Ravi Patel, who went around the country collecting memberships. We sold memberships for $100. And they sold them to the people that came after them after their chairmanship was over, and building these memberships up. And that happened at Days Inn. It was a major, to me, as I look back over 43 years, it was probably the single most important thing I ever did in this business. Because the effects of that and the legacy of AHOA is a once-in-a-lifetime. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing that really, I mean, discrimination is something that is such a repulsive concept to me personally, that you rarely get a chance in your business career to do something that sticks it right in the eye of a discriminator. And what we did was we stuck it right in the eye. And so that was a big moment for me and has been.
Well, I think you also created close to about 150 millionaires when you did that too.
Well, I mean, I don't think that I did that. That I did that on a personal basis. I can't take the same credit as somebody who starts a company that's public and everybody gets millions of dollars. But
well, you leveled the playing field for them, which is exactly what they were asking for.
yeah,
They wanted.
that's for no more than
They
that.
wanted everybody to know what is it that they were doing, and
Well, that's what we should all be about. I mean, everybody should have a level playing
Yeah.
field. You know, I think that when I came into the hotel business, the playing field wasn't very level either. And you know, the 60s were the 60s. It's not the 2000. 40 years is a long time. Discrimination takes a long time to rub out. And it's still there in areas. And you have to be constantly working on the kinds of things that provide people the opportunity. And today, when I look at some of the major hotel companies like Hilton and Marriott and whatever, who have major Indian ownership, major, I'm talking major, you know, I was there when they wouldn't deal with the community, would not deal with the community. So, interesting. You have to understand that Days Inn to me was the fulfillment of all of my career ambitions. I loved the job. I loved the company. I was having a wonderful time with my customers and with my employees, and it was the high point of my career, certainly to that time, and may very well be the high point of my career anyway. When they refused to put the money back in, I went to a lawyer. The lawyer was a friend of mine in Boston at the time, and to say I needed guidance. I didn't know what to do. My controller in the company, who was a guy I put in the job, was essentially the whistleblower. He was the one who was telling me what was going on because I didn't know that the cash was moving around. The lawyer in Boston got somebody from his firm, who was a criminal lawyer, who suggested that it was a fraud that they were committing because of the public debt, and that since I was knowledgeable about it, I had two choices. I either had the choice of leaving the company, resigning, or taking it to the authorities. One of the parties, the Tolman Huntley ownership, had told me while I was trying to get the money back that he would not allow anybody to ever take his lifestyle away in a very threatening way. So I was not exactly anxious to go to the authorities, and so I decided to resign.
you also made some very brave and bold decisions in your career. What advice do you have for these young people who are going into a very interesting ethical climate in business today?
Well, I don't think, I think whether you pay a price economically for it or you don't is not relevant. I think at the end of the day, when it's all over, or getting to be over, you need to look at yourself and you need to be proud of what you've done. Net worth is not the scoreboard. The scoreboard is essentially how you feel about yourself as a human being and as a person. Not everyone has the opportunity to do great things that have great scope, but everyone has the opportunity to do little things. Just reading a book on the train yesterday where Elie Wiesel was part of this book, was saying that each person, if they just affect one person, can make a significant difference. You don't have to be always in the big picture. So to me, what counts at the end is who you have impacted, how you have impacted them, and that you can stand up never having to say that you did the wrong thing for personal gain. It's just not about numbers.
You've been very long in the business, and we've seen you have international experience. I was wondering, did your values of life ever change?
I hope not. I hope I am the same person who, when I was in college, and my fraternity was not allowed to take in someone whose religion was different by its national charter, I said, we're taking them in. And we lost our national charter for a year. I hope I'm the same person who treated people, no matter who or what they were, or where they came from, the same in 1955 today. So I think that to me, I don't think values change. I hope they don't change. Although I will say that the economic pressures in this society in particular are such that I sit back and I say, I can't imagine what happened to that person. What happened? What did that person forget, he or she forget? But, you know, at lunch today, one of the people sitting at the table was talking about his daughter. I'm sure Dick heard it. And he said, she graduated from Columbia, and she wants to make a lot of money. And so she's working in a firm down on Wall Street. I'm sitting there saying, it's never been important to me to make a lot of money. Why is it important? Why is a 22-year-old girl coming out of Columbia University say, I want to make a lot of money? What's the motivation for that? I can understand if she says, I want to be really successful. I want to be able to make a contribution. I want to, but, you know, and she said, I want to make a lot of money. That's a value. That's not going to change. That value is going to be that change. This particular young woman went through 2 days of interviewing. I would never hire her. Never. Because but the people who hired her, that's their value structure. Come work for me, you can make a lot of money. Life is not about zeros. I can tell you that I firmly believe that tourism brings people together. And I'll give you, I know we're going to run out of time here, so I'm going to give you just a quick example. I was doing some work with Tel Aviv University a few years ago after the Oslo agreements. And as part of that, we took a trip to Israel with a group of Hindus, Muslims, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and atheists, and a baby. It was a heck of a group. We spent 7 days together in a bus, and we went to every religious site of every religion who had one there. We went to the Palestinian Convention and Visitors Bureau, which I didn't even know existed in the city of Bethlehem, and talked with them about building tourism. We talked with Christian Arabs. We talked with a variety of people. And so people understood each other's points of view and each other's histories and whatever. And I think the most important thing, we talked about H.P. Rama, who was on that trip. And I was in Bethlehem in the church over the manger where Jesus was born. And in that church, I think it's the Church of the Nazarene is what they call it, I saw H.P. Rama sitting in the back row meditating. And afterwards, I said to him, what are you doing? You know, this is not a Hindu site. And he said, every holy site is a holy site. And I think what you get out of that is that when you bring people together, the ability to have people understand that the value structures of all of the great world's religions, the value structures that are so dear and near to you are the same ones that are near and dear to everyone. tourism brings people together like that. The hotel industry is a place where different people are always stuck together for one reason or another. So we should be a leader in understanding, tolerance, and exhibiting that in the way we handle people. And so at Tel Aviv, we were trying to build a program through the business school to do that. And we began with that trip. And we made some progress, and then of course Oslo blew up and everything else blew up. And we hope that it'll still regenerate itself, because we were looking for money for hotels, for a hotel to be built in Bethlehem, in Ramallah, in some of these Palestinian sites where we could generate economics, which would generate jobs and stuff for the people. And it didn't make any difference where you came from or what you did. That was the objective. So I saw firsthand what we could even start to do. So my hope is that the industry will continue to do that.
Having worked in units and had a number of general responsibility jobs, but now you're really in the home office. I mean,
well, I felt the home office, how do I look about it? I felt the home office was really a lot of waste. I mean, I think corporate offices are, I mean, I don't want to say really what I feel on the tape, but I mean, they'll bleep it out if it ever gets on television. But I mean, a lot of people feeling very self-important about themselves. You know, at the end of the day, the money that's generated, the profit is generated from the field. It's not generated in the corporate office. The corporate office is there at the behest of the field. And a lot of the staff people that I had to take care of when I was in the Bahamas or in these other places were really a pain in the neck. You know, one guy came down to the Bahamas, and the next day he comes into my office and he says, "I got a real bone to pick with you." I said, "What bone is that?" He was the human resource director. So what bone is that? He said, "Well, there's not a bottle of scotch in my room." So I said, "Well, so?" So he said, "Well, you're supposed to put a bottle of scotch in my room." I said, "Well, nobody told me I'm supposed to put a bottle of scotch in your room." I said, "You're here to look at my human resource things. Nobody told me to give you a bottle of scotch." He said, "Well, I get it everywhere I go." And he really got aggravated. You know, so I had nothing to do with him. I couldn't handle, I just felt that was wrong. But he did his best to hurt me too, because of that, and that's the way it was. So corporate office staff people have to be very, very careful. So when I got to the corporate office, I said, I'm not going to behave that way to the field. And sure enough, the guy before me, the general sales manager, had lots of problems instituting his policies in the sales organization in the company. And I did very well with that. The general managers welcomed me in because I could talk their language. They knew I was there to help them. I wasn't there just to help myself. And so I think when you're in the corporate office, you really have to think about, who's paying you? The field. And it doesn't always happen that way. And in the hotel business, one thing, there is no substitute for revenue at the top line. No substitute. It can make an idiot look good as long as people are sleeping in your beds. I mean, it's hard to mess this business up at a 90% occupancy. Very, very hard. You can try. And people have tried to mess it up.
Oh, yes.
They try very hard. But when you're the only hotel there, the guests can hate you. They still show up again. And the money just flows right to the bottom. So anyway, I stay overnight in the hotel, and I meet him at 6 a.m. at the Howard Johnson's restaurant. And he says, I want you to become the Senior Vice President of Sales and Advertising of American, and I want you to move to Dallas. I said, why? I said, well, why me? I said, I don't know the airline business. I'm a hotel guy. You know, I said, so he gave me a few reasons. Nothing very substantial, like I don't love you, you know, this, that, or that, or whatever. But he liked me because he felt I was very customer sensitive and bright, according to him, and whatever. And I said, I'll think about it. And I thought about it for about a half a day, and I said, I don't want to do it. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, I just don't think there's enough, the rationale, what he gave me for wanting me in the job wasn't good enough. He didn't know enough about my character. He didn't know enough about what was important to me. He didn't know really what my real talents were. And I felt that It just was something that said it wasn't right. So I never went. And they sold the company, and I ended up a year later moving the company to Chicago, where the new owners were for Americana Hotels for the last 5 years of my Americana term, and ended up going from Senior Vice President of Marketing to Executive VP of Operations, because the operations guy left, and I took over and finally got in 1981, I'm now in the business 20 years, I finally got to be in charge of operations of a hotel company. Took me 20 years to get there. And I worked for a fellow in Chicago by the name of Hal Milner, who was an ex-financial senior VP finance for Marriott. He was a very, very difficult guy, a very demanding guy. And I had to put together the operating team, the regional vice presidents. I had a marketing person reporting to me. I had engineering and purchasing and all that kind of stuff. And in Americana, it was really essentially I was running a hotel company.
Mr. Leven, what do you think the hardest thing that we're going to have to overcome once we get out into the industry?
I think the ability to ask a question in this room may be the hardest thing you have to do. I think the hardest thing you're going to have to overcome when you get out into this industry, John, is going to be doing jobs that you think you're overqualified to do, and having the patience to put up with it until you get to the next level. It's a very unusual situation when somebody comes out with a qualification that you people will have, that you're actually going to maximize your capabilities in. So you're probably going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to wait and be patient through that first or even second job opportunity. And my advice would be to do that and wait, and keep learning while you're waiting, because the time will come where you will get a chance to exercise your skills. You know, I want to know what they're doing in the community. I want to know what they're doing at their church. I want to know what they're doing in nonprofit activities. I want to know about their life. I want to know how they live. And if I find a good person who's got some experience in whatever, that's what I'm looking for. And because if you're a customer-centric company, which I hope we are, which you have to be successful, then I'm looking for people who are sensitive, who can build relationships and have relationships. And because I don't interview very many people anymore, because there's only a few people who report to me directly now. But I try to hire the people who will have the same kinds of hiring situations. Almost all the people I meet are good enough to do the job they're in. Why is it that some do better than others? They either have more motivation, they have more rationale, they have better relationships. It isn't that they work harder, they work on the right things. They have a way of selecting those things. So I look for things in their background that will tell me that they can have that kind of situation. But mostly I look for good people, good, as opposed to highly skilled.
Inside Hospitality Leadership, a conversation with Mike Leven. I'm Richard Brush, Dean of the Hospitality College at Johnson & Wales University. As America's career university, Johnson & Wales continuously infuses our academic programs with the expertise and knowledge of industry professionals. In October of 2003, we dedicated our first professorial chair to hospitality legend Bill Tiefel, retired Vice Chairman of Marriott International and Chairman Emeritus of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. The embodiment of exemplary leadership in the hospitality industry, Bill has had a remarkable career at one of the world's premier hospitality companies, and in retirement has dedicated himself to education and mentorship. An honorary degree recipient and a valued member of our Board of Trustees, Bill has tirelessly championed hospitality education throughout his 4 decades in the industry. And now, thanks to Bill's generous endowment, his efforts to ensure the future success of the hospitality field by educating tomorrow's industry leaders will continue in perpetuity through the William R. Tiefel professorial chair. The Tiefel Chair updates the staid academic tradition of professorial chairs by filling the position in true Johnson & Wales fashion, not with ivory tower academics, but with seasoned industry professionals. The chairholder not only shares his knowledge and industry insights with our students, but he also serves as an ambassador and liaison to us, maintaining contact and exchange with the field. While the chair resides at the Hospitality College in Providence, students at all our campuses benefit from the wisdom and career advice of industry leaders who visit Johnson & Wales under its auspices. As the first recipient of the Tiefel Chair, President and Chief Executive Officer of U.S. Franchise Systems, Mike Leven, put this promise into action, touring our campuses and sharing his 4 decades of hospitality insight along the way. Mike capped off his year occupying the Tiefel Chair in December of 2004 in a discussion with myself and Charlotte Campus Vice President Tarun Malik, and a question and answer period with a student audience. Mike discussed the lessons he's learned throughout his career and the legacy he's left through co-founding the Asian American Hotel Operators Association, or AHOA. For those of you who don't know Mike, his humor, intelligence, and integrity will speak for themselves. For those of you familiar with his achievements and charm, you already have an inkling what's in store. We've compiled the highlights from Mike's insights into this presentation of Inside Hospitality Leadership, a conversation with Mike Leven, the first in a series featuring hospitality industry insiders exploring the issues of modern leadership in a complex environment.
A nephew of mine who had worked on Wall Street said, you know, you're 57, 58 years old, 57 years old, why don't you go into business for yourself and I can help you buy a hotel brand and we can go and do it. And we did it. And we raised $17 million. We bought the Mike Hotel brand, and I resigned from Holiday Inn in August of 1995. And started our business October 2nd, 1995 with the Mike Hotel brand, and 6 months later did the Hawthorne brand, and took the company public a year after that, sold the company 4 years later, still work for the company, and fast forward, here I am. Well, I felt the home office, how do I look about it? I felt the home office was really a lot of waste. I mean, I think corporate offices are, I mean, I don't want to say really what I feel on the tape, but it would, they'll bleep it out if it ever gets on television. But I mean, a lot of people feeling very self-important about themselves. You know, at the end of the day, the money that's generated, the profit is generated from the field. It's not generated in the corporate office. The corporate office is there at the behest of the field. And a lot of the staff people that I had to take care of when I was in the Bahamas or in these other places were really a pain in the neck. We had a Holiday Inn franchise, a Quality franchise, a Ramada franchise, a Days franchise. I had had Sheraton franchises at Dunphy when I was there. I had had Hilton franchises at Americana. I'd been a franchisee. And the way I was treated as a franchisee was nothing short of horror. And I hated it. They treated me like, just like I was paying rent and that was it. And so I really intuitively felt there has to be a real opportunity to change the franchise business. And I started to do some research. I started to look at it, and what I found was that there were a lot of Indian-owned hotels. And I developed a relationship with a couple of the people in the community, and they started telling me how they couldn't get loans, they couldn't get insurance, they were getting discriminated against, et cetera, and so forth. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, they say our hotels are dirtier, we don't pay our bills, blah, blah, blah. And so I went out and I started to do some research, and I found out that we had the same amount of bad payers in that community as any others. We had the same amount of problems in that community as any others. It was nothing different. It was pure discrimination. As I look back over 43 years, it was probably the single most important thing I ever did in this business. Because the effects of that and the legacy of AHOA is a once-in-a-lifetime. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing that really I mean, discrimination is something that is such a repulsive concept to me personally that you rarely get a chance in your business career to do something that sticks it right in the eye of a discriminator. And what we did was we stuck it right in the eye.
You've been very long in the business and we've seen you have international experience. I was wondering, did your values of life ever change?
I hope not. I hope I am the same person who, when I was in college, and my fraternity was not allowed to take in someone whose religion was different by its national charter, I said, we're taking them in. And we lost our national charter for a year. I hope I'm the same person who treated people, no matter who or what they were, or where they came from, the same in 1955 today. In the hotel business, one thing, there is no substitute for revenue at the top line. No substitute. It can make an idiot look good as long as people are sleeping in your beds. I mean, it's hard to mess this business up at a 90% occupancy. Very, very hard. You can try. And people have tried to mess it up.
Oh, yes.
They try very hard. But when you're the only hotel there, the guests can hate you. They still show up again. And the money just flows right to the bottom.
You also made some very brave and bold decisions in your career. What advice do you have for these young people who are going into a very interesting ethical climate in business today?
Well, I think whether you pay a price economically for it or you don't is not relevant. I think at the end of the day, when it's all over, or getting to be over, you need to look at yourself and you need to be proud of what you've done. Net worth is not the scoreboard. The scoreboard is essentially how you feel about yourself as a human being and as a person. Not everyone has the opportunity to do great things that have great scope, but everyone has the opportunity to do little things. Just reading a book on the train yesterday where Elie Wiesel was part of this book, was saying that each person, if they just affect one person, can make a significant difference. You don't have to be always in the big picture. So to me, what counts at the end is who you have impacted, how you have impacted them, and that you can stand up never having to say that you did the wrong thing for personal gain. It's just not about numbers. I'll just tell you one story which says why you can't judge people. Is at Days Inn, I had a lawyer working for me I was very friendly with. He happens to be at Sendant now. We did a lot of work together. We traveled around the world together. We did a lot of work together. And after I left Days Inn, he stayed there, and he knew all about it. And one day we had lunch, and I said to him, Joel, what I don't understand is how can you stay? And he said to me, Mike, he said, I have a mortgage to pay, and I have sick kids. And he did. He had a couple of sick kids. And I couldn't really stand in judgment of him because his situation said he was not a participant. He just happened to be there. So I had to say to him, I understand. And so for everybody has different situations. Everybody walks to his own drummer. And I think you have to make a decision what works for you. When you bring people together, the ability to have people understand that the value structures of all of the great world's religions, the value structures that are so dear and near to you are the same ones that are near and dear to everyone. Tourism brings people together like that. The hotel industry is a place where different people are always stuck together for one reason or another. So we should be a leader in understanding, tolerance, and exhibiting that in the way we handle people. The hardest thing you're going to have to overcome when you get out into this industry, John, is going to be doing jobs that you think you're overqualified to do, and having the patience to put up with it until you get to the next level. It's a very unusual situation when somebody comes out with a qualification that you people will have, that you're actually going to maximize your capabilities in. So you're probably going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to wait and be patient through that first or even second job opportunity. And my advice would be to do that and wait, and keep learning while you're waiting, because the time will come where you will get a chance to exercise your skills. Well, I learned it on the job. Basically, most of my knowledge was gained from my customers. The people who were doing the work in the hotels were so busy all the time that I just I couldn't get any knowledge. So the only time I knew what was really happening was when I talked to my customers and they were telling me what was right and what was wrong. It's been a long, hard road, but I tell people today that from a career standpoint, I couldn't have learned more. I still learn. I'm still interested in learning, and I'm a great critic of our business, an outspoken critic of our business, and I still battle for the customer. I still think that's the most important thing. I fight for my employees. I've always done that, and I fight to do the right thing. And as long as I'm around, I'm going to do it, whether it's in the business or whether it's in the nonprofit world or wherever it is. That's my style. So I can honestly say after 43 years that as I look back on that part of my life, I never compromised my ethics, never compromised my values, and I stood for them. But it's very hard to continue to stand for that with the pressures, the economic pressures and the social pressures that are on you. You have to be very tough.